Hello, and welcome back to another edition here of regular verb conjugation. We're going to study regular verb conjugation from possibly a different angle than what you've seen it before tonight, and hopefully this is going to help you to understand what we're talking about when we talk about conjugating regular verbs in the present tense in Spanish. Now, I realize that this can be a bit of a challenge. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to take some notes on what we're talking about. And as I go through this, try to process it, try to work it through and understand it. And then what we're going to do after this is we're simply going to leave things where they are and move forward, because a lot of things when it comes to grammar make more sense as we go along. So if after the lesson tonight you still feel kind of sort of, like you're in the fog and just don't quite get everything, that's okay. That's okay. I remember personally when I was learning this many years ago, and yes, I can remember back that far, but I remember seeing some worksheets that I had done when I first learned how to do this, or was supposed to be learning how to do it, and seeing mistakes on those worksheets. But later on, when I saw them, I was like, oh my goodness, this seems so easy now. I can't believe I ever made those mistakes. That might be the case with you as well. So if you have not yet turned in your worksheet to me that we assigned for practicing conjugating verbs, please go ahead and turn that in. I'm anxious to get feedback to you. Please turn in all of those exercises that I give you, because this is something we want to practice doing. Generally speaking, for most people, this isn't something you're going to understand just hearing about it. You actually have to get in and work with it a little bit. But like I said, after this, we are going to simply move forward, because I trust that a lot of these things are going to clear themselves up with use. We've kind of front loaded the information. I think that as you see it play out here, a lot of your confusion, if any, still exists after this lesson is going to be diminished. So take some notes, sit back, get ready, and let's go ahead and try to approach this from maybe a different angle than what you've seen before. So, first of all, when we talk about conjugating verbs, we're talking about how do we break things down so that they match our subject pronouns. Now let's talk about this in English for a little bit. Generally speaking, grammatical terms sound like technical academic words for the simplest things, and that is certainly the case here. When I'm talking about the subject of a sentence, I'm talking about who or what is performing the action of that sentence. If I say, Mrs. Smith mailed a letter yesterday, well, I can identify my verb. The verb tells me what the action or the state of being is. My verb in that sentence is mailed. Who or what did the mailing? Mrs. Smith did. So Mrs. Smith is the subject of the sentence. Now, which of these words could I replace Mrs. Smith with if I knew whom I was talking about and really didn't need to say her name again? Well, Mrs. Smith is a woman, so I could say she mailed the letter yesterday, and the word she would replace Mrs. Smith. If I said my father buys a new car every year, what's my verb? The verb, of course, the action is buys. Who or what does the buying? My dad does. So my dad is the subject of that sentence. Now, which of these subject pronouns could I use to substitute for the expression my dad if we already knew who we were talking about and I didn't need to say my dad again? Well, of course, that would be he. The word he would replace my dad in that sentence. In English, our subject pronouns are I, we, you, he, she, it, and they. And look at how I have them broken down on this chart here. Whenever I say first person, I mean I or we. Whenever I say second person, I mean you. In English, we used to distinguish between singular you and plural you. We had the word thou and we had the word ye. Of course, you'll recognize that from the Bible or from poetry, but we don't use those words in everyday speech any longer. We simply use the word you, regardless of whether we're talking about a singular entity or a plural entity. Of course, we know that in Southern English, we will say y'all or all of you if we really need to specify, but technically in standard English, the word you can be singular or plural. Now, get this in mind, and nearly all of your verb conjugation problems are going to melt away. When you're trying to decide which ending to put on a verb, or you're trying to decide anything about this first, second, or third person aspect, remember this. If it's not I, and it's not we, and it's not you, specifically, if I'm talking about Spanish, singular familiar you, we'll understand more about that as we go along, then it's third person. In other words, third person is a tremendously big umbrella. It takes in everything other than I, we, or you. It takes in everything else. So all we have to know is, am I dealing with something singular or plural? If I said the umbrella is in the car, all right, is that first, second, or third person? Well, my verb is. What is? The umbrella is. The umbrella is an it, isn't it? So the word it is third person singular because I only have one umbrella. If I say the dogs are in the doghouse, what's my verb? The verb is are. Are, an action or a state of being. The verb is are. Who or what are? Well, the dogs are. What can I replace the word dogs with? They. They are in the doghouse. If I already knew that I was talking about the dogs, there'd be no reason to repeat the dogs. I could simply say they. They are in the doghouse. All right, so the word they is my third person plural pronoun. So where do we get these? Well, the person who is doing the speaking or the writing, when he or she refers to him or herself, or to him or herself and someone else, because anybody plus me is a we, that is always first person. So first person is I and we. Think of the expression looking out for number one. First person, number one, get it? But so first person, if I'm going to write in the first person, I as a writer am going to refer to myself. If I'm going to speak in the first person, I as the speaker, I'm going to refer to myself. If I'm referring to myself and someone else, then we is my first person plural pronoun. Now, what about second person? Second person is to whom I am writing or with whom I am speaking. When I am referring to that individual or those individuals. In English, the pronoun you covers that. If I am talking to you about you, I call you you. If I'm talking to all of you about all of you, then I can say y'all, I can say all of you, or in standard English, I can just say you all over again. So that's first person, singular and plural. That's second person, singular and plural. Everything else is third person. Every man, woman, thing, every object, every emotion or feeling. It doesn't matter whether it's living or inanimate. It doesn't matter what it is. Everything is something we're talking about. To refer to something that I'm talking about, I use words like he and she and it and they. All right, so that's third person. Once we understand first, second, and third person, singular and plural in English, And here it is, there again, here it is. First, second, and third person, singular and plural. Once we understand that in English, it's pretty easy to understand it in Spanish as well. In Spanish, the word yo means I. The word nosotros means we. If an individual woman is talking about herself and other females, then she can say nosotras, but it's the same thing. That word still means we. I is yo, we is nosotros. That's first person. Notice its position on this chart here. The top line, everything to the left of this chart is always singular. As I'm looking at the chart, everything to the right of the chart, as I'm looking at it, is always plural. The top line is I and we. Yo, nosotros. So what about second person? Well, we've got a little wrinkle here. In Spanish, the word tú is singular, familiar, you. What that means is that's the way I say you to somebody I'm on a first name basis with. Maybe a friend, a family member, a younger person, somebody that I have some kind of a relationship with. The word tú is singular, familiar, you. Now, you'll notice that I put the word vosotros in parentheses. The word vosotros is the plural form of you, as a plural familiar form. That is a group of people that I would be on a first name basis with. However, this word is only used in everyday speech in Spain. It didn't catch on in everyday speech in Latin America. That is Mexico, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, this side of the Atlantic Ocean. It didn't catch on here. So we're going to see the word vosotros used in the Bible. We're going to see it in poetry. We might see it when people are trying to put on some airs and be fancy. But it's not going to be used in everyday speech. So I put it in parentheses. I just want you to understand it. We're not going to use it, however, to practice speaking. So that's why that word is in parentheses. Now you're probably thinking, well, how do I say all of you then? If I can't use the word vosotros? We'll come to that in just a moment. For right now, keep in mind that for our purposes, anything other than yo, nosotros, or tú is third person. That's everything else. So what are they? Well, let's go back to the third person singular. My pronouns are él, meaning he. Notice there's an accent mark on the word él. Without an accent mark, that is the masculine singular form of the word the. I don't want to say the here. I want to say he. So I have to put an accent mark on that word to make it mean he. Then the word ella means she. Notice that double L has a Y sound. Ella means she. Now, let's get this down once and for all. There is no subject pronoun in Spanish that simply means it. So if I want to say it happens, it opens, it breaks, it changes, anytime I want to say it, I don't use a pronoun. I just leave it blank. I don't say anything. I will use the third person singular form of my verb. That is the same verb that I would use for he or she. But I don't use the word, I don't use a word for it. Now I'll come back to usted in just a moment. Let's skip over to the plural side. The word ellos means they. And if I'm talking about all females, the word ellas also means they. Anytime we have a mixed gender group, that is boys and girls or men and women together, we always, by default, use the masculine plural form. So we would say nosotros if we were referring to ourselves and a mixed gender group, other people. We would say the word ellos, meaning they, if we were talking about men and women together. The only time we would say nosotras would be a lady referring to herself and other females, and the only time we would say ellas is if we were talking about a group of females. Now, let's look at the usted and ustedes. Note that they are third person. The rule still applies. If it's not I, and it's not we, and it's not the tú form of you, at least in everyday speech, it's third person. The word usted gets abbreviated capital UD period. You can spell it out, USTED. USTED. You can spell that word out if you want to, but we tend to abbreviate that. Notice it's a capital UD period. The word usted is singular formal you. That is the form of the word you that I'm going to use when I'm talking to somebody I'm on a last name basis with. Possibly somebody that I only know in a business or a professional setting. Somebody that I would maybe call by their last name because of their position, maybe the pastor or your lawyer or your doctor, somebody that I don't know very well or that I have just met. If you were to invite somebody to a gathering or something, but you don't know them well enough really to be on a first name basis with them yet, then it's always polite to use the word usted. You can always switch to tú a little later. But the word usted just means you. Singular you, but it's more formal, less familiar, more formal than the word tú. The word ustedes is simply the plural form of the word usted. Ustedes means y'all, or all of you, if you please. Since we don't use the word vosotros in Latin American Spanish, we're going to use the word ustedes with everybody, whether we're on a first name basis with them or not. So this would be with kids, grown-ups, it doesn't matter. Whether we're on a first name basis, a last name basis, if I'm talking about all of you, the word you, when I'm directing it to more than one person, then the word ustedes applies. Notice that that is third person plural. So we've got to get this down before we go any further. What do we mean by first person, second person, third person? What do we mean by singular and plural? So just to review, first person is always I and we. So yo or nosotros. Second person is you, in Spanish, singular, familiar you, the word tú. Since we're not going to use the word vosotros, other than to read it and understand it, I'm going to skip it. Then everything else is third person, and it is covered by these pronouns. The word él, with an accent, means he. The word ella means she. Again, no subject pronoun for the word it. Just skip it. Leave that part blank. And then the word usted, singular, formal you. On the plural side, ellos means they. Ellas means they if I have all ladies. And then the word ustedes means all of you or y'all. All of these are third person. I'm going to use the same verb form for he and she as I use for usted. I'm going to use the same verb form for ellos and ellas as I use for ustedes. Now, let's keep this in mind. English requires us to use a noun or a pronoun in a sentence every time I use a verb. Unless I am writing a telegram, I've got to say things like I and you, he and we. If I'm writing a telegram, I can say something like, am arriving on the 8th. Will need ride. Because we all know that we're abbreviating something. Well, in Spanish, it's a little different. Spanish is a pro-drop language, meaning we drop our pronouns if we don't need them. We're going to use our subject pronouns, these words, for clarity and for emphasis. That is, if I've got to clarify who I'm talking about, or if I want to be emphatic. I like flags. We eat at McDonald's. They go to the store. If I want to emphasize or underscore who I'm talking about, then I can put those pronouns back in. It's never incorrect to use them, but after we've clarified whom we're talking about, we want to drop them unless we need them for clarity or for emphasis. Now, on worksheets, in exercises, I oftentimes ask you to put those pronouns on there just for practice. So we'll get used to this as we go along, that after we clarify them, then in paragraphs or sentences, we're going to drop them, but we certainly need to know them. We need to know what they are. All right, so once I've got that down and I know the position here on this ladder, I've got 6 spaces. I need to see top line, I and we, middle line, okay, tú, everything else, the bottom 2 lines, singular on the left, plural on the right. Once I get that down, I'm ready then to look at verb endings. So let's look here. When I say that I want to conjugate my verbs, my regular verbs, in the present tense, I guess we'd better break down and decide what does that mean. Well, verbs, of course, are states of being or actions. They can be present tense, past tense, future, conditional. There are all kinds of things we can do with the verb. Take the word eat. In English, I can make it ate. Yesterday I ate. I will eat tomorrow. I would eat if I were hungry. Then I can do the perfect tenses. I have eaten. I had eaten. I will have eaten. I would have eaten. We have all kinds of things that we can do with verbs as far as time goes. So tense then is one thing I can do. Well, right now I'm just looking at how do I say things in Spanish in the present tense. Once I conjugate a verb, that is, once I change its ending and make whatever changes in it I need to make it match whoever is performing the action of that verb. Once I do that, then the other thing I'm going to look at here, I'm going to be able to tell, is this present tense? Is it past tense? Is it future tense? Is it one of the other tenses? So conjugating my verb is going to tell me both of those things. Now, when I say a regular verb, I mean all I've got to do is change the ending. That's all I got to do. So let's remember, verbs are actions or states of being, something you do. Now, we got to know what an infinitive is. If I use an infinitive in English, at least if it's by itself, I'm going to say the word to, and follow it by a verb. To go, to wash, to run, to sing, to pray, to talk, to think, to praise, to write, to read. There are thousands of them. Anytime I have the word to followed by a verb, that is an infinitive. Now we've got to know what this is, because if I want to look up a verb in Spanish in the dictionary or on a vocabulary list or in a glossary or something, I've got to know how to take that verb back to its infinitive form in order to be able to look it up. Let's say that I have a sentence. I want to just say, I thought you were coming yesterday. Well, let's say I want to look up that verb. Well, I'm not going to look the word thought up in the dictionary. The word thought is a past tense verb. I've got to look up to think, and then I've got to know what to do with it if I want to get it into the past tense. See? If I wanted to say something like, we will have read the newspaper by Tuesday. Will have read the newspaper by Tuesday. Well, will have read. My verb is to read. My verb is to read. So once I look up to read, that's the infinitive, then I can figure out how to turn that into will have read. Let me give you one more example. If I say, we caught the ball as it flew through the air. Let's say I want to look up the word caught. What do you think I have to look up? What infinitive do I have to look up? That's right, I have to look up the word catch. To catch is my infinitive. What about the word flew? That's a past tense form. What verb am I going to look up? That's right, I'm going to look up the word fly. To fly, that's my infinitive. If I said, we wrote a letter to the manager. If I want to look up the word wrote, well, I can't just look that word up. That's a past tense form. I've got to look up to write. Then I've got to learn how to conjugate it to make it past tense if I want it to be. Now, in Spanish, every single infinitive in the language ends in one of three ways. It can be an AR verb, an ER verb, or an IR verb. I always have to look at the last two letters. If the last two letters are AR, then that's an AR verb. For example, the word hablar. Hablar means to speak or to talk. That is an AR verb. The last two letters are AR. What about ER verbs? Well, the last two letters of an ER verb are ER. For example, the verb correr. Correr means to run. That is an ER verb. The last two letters are ER. What about the verb vivir? Well, that's an IR verb. How do I know? Again, I'm looking at the last two letters. The last two letters here are IR. So that's an IR verb. Keep that in mind. Every verb in the language is either an AR verb, an ER verb, or an IR verb, with no exceptions. To be, to run, to have, to think, to play. I could go on and on and on. We are always going to do it in Spanish with just one word, whereas in English we'll say two and then the verb. Well, in Spanish I'm just going to have just one word. I'm going to have just my verb, but it's always going to end with either AR, ER, or IR. Now, those are endings. When I take them off, that leaves the stem. So hablar, if I take that AR off, I'm left with the stem, HABL. Correr, if I take the ER off, that leaves me with what? CORR. That's the stem. The verb vivir, if I take that IR off, I'm left with VIV. Once again, that's the stem. That means to live. Vivir, that's the stem. All right, well, I'm going to take that IR off. We'll practice that with a little bit more, and we'll practice that a little bit more in just a moment here. But conjugating means I'm going to change that ending out. I'm going to take the AR, ER, or IR off, and I'm going to put another ending on it. That ending is going to match whoever or whatever is performing the action of the verb. And when I get done, it will tell me if this is present tense, one of the past tenses, future tense, whatever. It'll tell me the tense as well. So we're always going to make the verb match whoever is doing or whatever is doing the action of that verb. That's called conjugating. Now, when I say it's a regular verb, what I mean is that's all I have to do. Swap out the ending, and I'm done. I don't have to make any changes to the stem. Unfortunately, we're going to get into this in the next chapter. We have irregular verbs in Spanish. That is, verbs that changes have to be made to the stem in order to conjugate it. Don't get nervous. They fall into categories. They're not hard to learn. And a lot of them are high frequency verbs anyway, so we learn them quickly. But right now, let's just focus on regular verbs, verbs that only have to have a change in their ending in order to conjugate them. And that's all I have to do. Moving on then, let's practice here. We need to be able to identify those stems. Verbs always have two parts. There's a stem and the ending. Let's take the verb cantar. Cantar means to sing. Well, the C-A-N-T part is the stem. The A-R is the ending. The verb vender means to sell. The V-E-N-D part is the stem. The E-R is the ending. The verb escribir means to write. The E-S-C-R-I-B part is the stem. The IR is the ending. So that's an example of all three forms of my verb. Cantar is an AR verb. Vender is an ER verb. Escribir is an IR verb. AR verbs, the ending always ends with an AR in the infinitive form. To say to do something, it'll always end with an AR. ER verbs always end with with ER. ER verbs always end with ER. And IR verbs always end with IR. So once I take that AR, ER, or IR off, I'm left with my stem. Now what we need to remember is if all I have to do is put a new ending on it to conjugate it, and then I'm done, then it's a regular verb. That's what we're studying right now, is regular verbs. Now, let's have a look here at our endings. Unlike the charts that you've seen before, I have consolidated these into a group here, and I hope that this makes it a little bit easier. You've got your verb, those are called paradigms, by the way, when I show you what the endings are for AR verbs, then for ER verbs, then for IR verbs, and it's in your book that way. Those are called verb paradigms. Big word, paradigms. But all it means is these are the patterns that we follow. But if I put them all together, it might make it a little bit easier to digest. First person singular is always O. That means if I am performing the action of a verb, it doesn't matter whether it's an AR verb, an ER verb, or an IR verb. Does not matter. The ending will always be an O. So I'm going to take the AR, ER, or IR off and put an O on it. What about first person plural? Well, the ending is always going to have a mos in it, M-O-S. If it's an AR verb, it'll be amos. If it's an ER verb, it'll be amos. If it's an IR verb, it'll be emos. So anytime I'm saying we are doing something, I'll use the word nosotros if I need to for emphasis. But anytime you see a verb where there is an amos, amos, or emos on the end, that is always the we form of the verb. That's first person. That's it. If it's yo, put an O on it. If it's nosotros, put amos, amos, or emos on it. Now, what about second person? Remember, that's the singular familiar form of the word you, the form of you that I'm going to use when I'm on a first name basis with somebody. I take off the AR, ER, or IR, and my endings are always as or es. Just that letter S there makes it the tu form. If it is an AR verb, it'll be as. If it's an ER or an IR verb, it will be es. Please keep in mind that ER verbs and IR verbs are always just alike, except for the nosotros form, and of course the vosotros form, which we're just looking at, we're not going to practice. All right, so if it's an AR verb, the tu form will be as. If it's an ER or an IR verb, the tu form will be es. That's first and second person right there. Everything else is third person. If it is an AR verb, the third person ending is a. If it's an ER or an IR verb, The third person ending is a. What if it's plural? They or all of you, for example. Anytime I've got a group of people and there's an S on the end of my noun, my friends, our parents, his in-laws, the cars, the cats, whatever. Anytime, the buildings, anytime I'm talking about a plural entity, if it's not we, then it's going to have an N on it, and that's going to be third person plural. So, AR verbs, the third person plural ending is on. ER verbs or IR verbs, the third person plural ending is N. Let's look at some examples now. Whenever I want to conjugate a verb, I'm giving you 3 examples here. Let's take the verb trabajar, to work, or the verb comer, to eat, or the verb abrir, to open. Well, the first thing I have to do is decide what kind of a verb am I talking about here. To work, trabajar, that's an AR verb. Comer, to eat, that's an ER verb. Abrir, to open, that's an IR verb. Then I can look back at my chart here and see exactly what ending do I need for whatever it is that I want to say. If I want to say I work, well, the word yo means I don't really need to use it because I have an ending here. First person singular ending is the letter O. So I'm going to take the AR off of trabajar and say trabajo. What about I eat? Well, I'm going to take the ER off of comer and say como. Yo como, if I want to be emphatic, but just como, all by itself, means I eat. And if I want to say I don't eat, I say no como. No como. The word abrir means to open. How would I say I open? Abro. Abro. So that's first person singular. What about the plural forms? Trabajamos, we work. No trabajamos, we don't work. Comemos, we eat. No comemos, we don't eat. Abrimos, we open. No abrimos, we do not open. All right. So first person, either singular or plural. O or amos, hemos, and imos. Now let's look at second person. To use the singular familiar form, the tu form of my verb. Those verbs are going to end with either as or es. So let's say I want to know, do you work tonight? ¿Trabajas esta noche? You hear that S on there, you know it's the tu form. I don't even have to say, ¿trabajas tú? If I wanted to say, you eat a lot, that'd be a very unkind thing to say to somebody, but just for practice. Well, I'm going to say, tú comes mucho. Why es? Well, because look, es, that's my ending for regular, my ending for regular ER verbs in the present tense. So, tú comes. That's second person singular, you. I'm not going to worry about the plurals. Let's look at abrir, to open. Well, that's an IR verb. If I wanted to say, you open, tú abres, or I can just skip the word tú and just say abres. Now, everything else is third person. So if I wanted to say, he works, él trabaja. She works, ella trabaja. It works, trabaja. I don't even have to use a pronoun. I don't have a pronoun to use. Just trabaja. I just skip to the form of the verb that I need. How about eats? Well, he eats, él come. She eats, ella come. You eat, the usted form, usted come. You'll notice that in the third person, we tend to use those pronouns, those subject pronouns, more frequently because we need them for clarity. Unless we know who we're talking about, we might have to use them to clarify whom we're talking about. It's never wrong to use them. We just don't want to overuse them. Once we've established whom we're talking about, until we change the subject, we can drop our pronouns. But for practice. What about abrir? Abrir means to open. Well, my IR's got to come off. That leaves my stem ABR. He opens, él abre. She opens, ella abre. What about it opens? That's right, just abre. No pronoun, abre. How about you open when it's singular, formal you? Somebody I'm on a last name basis with. Usted abre. Usted abre. Now, anything singular, I'm still going to use this form of the verb. So, it's not I, it's not you, it's singular. This is the form of the verb I use. So if I wanted to say, well, what can I say? How about Mr. Johnson eats a lot of tacos? El señor Johnson come muchos tacos. If I wanted to say, the teacher opens the door of the classroom. El maestro abre la puerta del salón. Abre. Abre because third person singular. All right. If I wanted to say, well, what can we say? How about the team works? Well, that's one team. Even though there's more than one person on it, I'm still going to say el equipo trabaja. Even in English, I say works, and that's third person singular. If I wanted to say the family does not eat liver. La familia no come hígado. Once again, I didn't say families. I said family. That's only one family. Come, no come hígado. All right, enough of that. Let's go to the third person plural now. Third person plural, for AR verbs, it's on. For ER or IR verbs, it's N. Got to remember to take off the AR, the ER, or the IR before I do that. But here we go. If I wanted to say they work, ellos trabajan. If I wanted to say all of you eat, ustedes comen. If I wanted to say they open, and I'm only talking about ladies, ellas abren. Anything plural now is still going to have that N on it, either on or N, regardless of what it is. So if I wanted to say, my parents don't work on Sundays. Mis padres, that's plural, isn't it? No trabajan los domingos. Hopefully we've got the idea here how to do this, and it's just now a matter of, well, learning the infinitives, that's vocabulary, but then simply using it and practicing with it. Now, I want to say a word here about practicing your conjugations. When you practice conjugating a verb, always do it in the same order. I'm going to do the first, second, and third person singular, then the first person and the third person plural. And I'm going to do it in that same order every time because I want to get a feel for this to where I don't have to think about it anymore. I want the proper ending to roll out of my mouth without me having to stop and consider or deliberate about what to say. So I want to do it the same way every time and build up that habitual practice of saying it right every time. So, trabajo, trabajas, trabaja, trabajamos, trabajan. Como, comes, come, comemos, comen. Abro, abres, abre, abrimos, abren. I want to do it the same way every time and get it to where I don't even have to think about it anymore. I could be fixing the faucet, washing the dishes. It wouldn't matter what I was doing, getting ready to make the bed, anything I was doing, it wouldn't matter. I could just in the back of my mind just roll these right off of my tongue. I want to practice them till I get them to that point. So get your vocabulary out and practice conjugating your verbs. That'll make it easier as you go along. Now, let's do a little guided practice here. I'm telling you in English what I want to say. I'm giving you the infinitive. Then I'm giving you the pronoun in Spanish. You can look at the chart here. But tell me what I would fill the blank in with. I'll give you a moment, and then I'll give you the answer, and you can see how close you were. Let's take the verb tomar. Tomar can mean to take or to drink. I want to say, now tomar is to take or to drink. I want to make it into I take. My pronoun is yo. What do I fill the blank in with? That's right. I fill the blank in with tomo. Yo tomo. I take. How about we should? The verb deber means to be obligated to. That's where we get should from. I want to say we should. So that's my pronoun, nosotros in Spanish. What do I fill the blank in with? Nosotros debemos. Nosotros debemos. We should. How about you decide, but this is singular, familiar you. The word decide, to decide, is decidir. What do you think we say? We'll say tú decides. That is an IR verb. The ES is what I use for the second person singular, tú decides. All right, how about he walks? The word caminar means to walk. That's the word I have to conjugate. I'm going to take that AR off first. My pronoun is él. Now, what do I need? Well, who walks? He does. It's not I. It's not we. It's not the tú form of you. So we know it's third person. Is it third person singular or is it third person plural? He. By its very nature, the word he is singular. So I would say what? Él camina. Él camina. AR verb. The A is my ending, just sound. That is my ending for the third person singular. How about all of you read? The word all of you is ustedes. To read is leer. So how would I say all of you read? Ustedes leen. 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 Ustedes leen. All right. Now, it breaks. It breaks. The verb romper means to break. How would I say it breaks? Did you just say rompe? That is correct. There is no subject pronoun that just means it. So just skip it. Skip the pronoun. Just say the verb. Rompe. Third person singular, same form as I use for he or she, él, ella, or for usted, singular formal you, I'm going to use for it as well, but I don't have a subject pronoun that I'm going to state. Then I want to say you receive, but look at this. This is singular formal you. The form of the word you that I use when I'm on a last name basis with somebody. The verb recibir means to receive. So how do I say you receive? Usted recibe. Usted recibe. All right. Hopefully this is making some more sense to you now. All right. Now, if you have any questions about this, or if there's anything further that I can clarify for you, you know how to get a hold of me. You can call me, you can text me, you can send me a direct message through the system, You can always just type your question out and post it to our course room. We'll get back to you. Somebody else might beat me to it and might answer your question before I do. But that's what you're a part of that community for, to help one another, to be able to post your questions. You can put something up and say, this is what I think the right answer is, but let me know. Finish that worksheet that I gave you. Get that finished. Work on that and send it to me. I'll send you feedback. I'll tell you which ones need attention. But let's go ahead and practice this. Now, as I said, we're going to move forward here. So work on learning your vocabulary for Chapter 6. Work with your flashcard program. Get your vocabulary down. This does take a little practice, but if after this you're still a little fuzzy on it or whatever, that's okay. This will clear up as we move forward, so you won't be lost. And of course, we'll always be here to help you if you have any trouble. All right, thank you.